Comrades, this is perhaps the most difficult video that I've made. When I wrote my book, Dialectical Materialism versus the New Physics, I was stunned when many supposed Marxists were uninterested in the subject or even opposed. Surely Marxists would welcome my book, I thought, but I was sure surprised when, if anything, the very opposite happened. It has taken me many years to figure out why this happened, and that is the basis for this video talk. This talk, however, is not an attack on all those wonderful activists and Marxists that are working so hard all over the world to fight against the blood-stained vampire that is U.S. imperialism. Our comrades are doing wonderful work. This video, in effect, is my small attempt to save Marxist analysis from the ideological disaster that happened after Lenin died, and then even worse, after the Soviet Union was overthrown. In this video, I will examine the human brain, finding out why what seems so obvious is not actually obvious to our fellow humans. In addition, I will go over the basics of dialectical materialism and its vital connection with the concept of infinity. In this video, we must go back to the basics. I'll start with Occam's razor. Occam's razor dictates that the simplest answer is the preferred answer. But what if our brains are not geared to accept the simplest answer? What if our brains aren't geared for a materialist understanding about the world, but rather our human brains are naturally idealist, simply because our neurons cannot think, read, write, or add. Our brain's neurons can only react to what they see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, all of which are superficial messages that create images without the need for explanation. The brain is not a computer. There is no file cabinet of memories in our brain. The human brain is just a colony of single-celled animals. The 86.1 billion neurons in a single human head is a colony that numbers about 10 times the entire human world population. When we are born, that huge mass of neurons knows nothing about the outside world. As I speak to you, I am speaking to that colony of neurons. You are the dialectical materialist unity of opposites. On one side, you are the tiny neuron, and you're at one end of the contradiction. The individual neurons cannot think, nor can they read, write, and add, yet you can, even though you are these neurons. The 86.1 billion single-cell animals become you by the dialectical process of changing quantity into quality. Each single-cell neuron is unable to exist or do anything on its own, but allied with and coordinating with billions of other neurons, those neurons become you. Quantity turns into quality. Every minute of every day after birth, this mass of neurons, you, must learn how to survive in a very scary outside world. With no understanding of that outside world, this massive community of 86.1 billion cells can only guess one experience at a time of what is coming next. This community of neurons makes guesses, which we call an imagination, with nothing to contain that imagination except the senses. A child may fear that imaginary monsters are living under its bed, but with every new experience, that wild and scary imagination retreats as reality begins to make sense to this massive colony of neurons. Human society has advanced over time from primitive belief in numerous gods and imaginary beings to today to scientific and technologically based economy. Today, humans live in a world far removed from our Stone Age ancestors, but our brain is the same brain as the Stone Age human's brain. The difference between the Stone Age human brain and the modern human brain arises from centuries of humans developing our agricultural and industrial production methods. In other words, the modern human brain's development was created by humans themselves by adding knowledge year by year, generation after generation, millennia after millennia. Human beings, by creating the production methods around us, have created an internal revolution inside our own brains. Modern technological human society requires extensive training of our neurons. Training these human neurons is a time-consuming and very, very difficult process. It takes 12 long and hard years just to learn the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic. 12 long years just to graduate from elementary school. It takes several more years of university educational training to become proficient. And even that university educational training does not guarantee that the human, even with the highest diploma, is capable of thinking outside of the box of that specific educational training. In human evolution, educational training is a very recent phenomenon. Just 200 years ago, most humans were illiterate and had never even seen a machine of any sort. What training does is to force the neurons as a collective to learn to respond to certain stimuli in a manner that is expected. You teach a pet dog its name by repetition. It is the same for a human child learning its name. Repetition forces those human neurons to respond to that name. In other words, learning requires the brain cells to collectively focus and respond appropriately. Repetition trains the entire colony. Our colony of neurons, for its survival, must give the parent or the substitute parent that we call a teacher its collective attention. Our neurons learn to give the parent or the substitute parent the right answer. Getting that right answer is truly hard for a community of single-cell animals that cannot think. That is why it takes so many years just to learn the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic, and why so many humans quit the learning process all too early. It is hard and very slow work. Learning means finding the one single correct answer from many possibilities. Finding the single correct answer is very difficult for single-celled animals that do not even know what an answer is. You are asking the neuron to do something that it is not designed to do, to give an answer, any answer. No other species sends its offspring to elementary school or to the universities. The school is where our species today passes down its millennia of human created knowledge, created generation by generation. For that single-celled animal, where giving any answer has no meaning, trying to get the correct answer is only its way of surviving, not anything more. The brain just wants to give a response that is acceptable, not logical. A neuron does not use logic. Gods and demons are real to the untrained brain as explanations for what it experiences, simply because that is the direction of least resistance. It is a simple and understandable explanation in a world of mystery. It took millennia of human experience and productive advancement to narrow that human imagination just down to a single God. Adding 2 plus 2 may seem obvious to you today, but it is not obvious for those neurons. Before learning that 2 plus 2 equals 4, the colony had to learn what a number even represents. Only through repetition and training can these neurons be brought to the correct answer, that is 2 plus 2 equals 4. Here is where my problem begins to be understandable. All that hard training prevents new ideas from breaking through, because the individual has made such a huge investment in that training. In addition, social pressure is a conservative force against anything that's controversial or a new idea that controverts that training. Humans are pack animals. If the tribe or community or nation believes something, it is very hard for the individual to question or reject the views of the tribe. That is understandable, but it is also a problem. If you look around the world, there are hundreds of belief systems, all based on tribal historical development. It is why every tribe has its own belief system and its own language, and it uses its own educational system to train its offspring in that belief system. Those tribal belief systems date back centuries. Religion, as the first human attempt to understand nature, flowered everywhere with all sorts of different idealist explanations of how humans came to be and how the earth and its animals and its plants came to be. A materialist worldview is a very recent development. For humanity, even today, that idealist heritage, combined with tribal pressure and the huge personal investment that each person had to make to get an education, makes it so hard for an outside-the-box message to overcome. It has taken millennia of human ideological development to discover the answers that seem so simple to me. Whether it is 2 plus 2 plus 4, or that the earth is not flat and the earth circles the sun, these simple answers and observations are anything but simple for our neurons to understand, and that is why these ideas are only recent developments. In my videos, I am almost pleading with the viewers to open their eyes to see the obvious, but it is me who is not seeing that the obvious to me is not the obvious to them. That is why Occam's razor, the simplest answer, meets an ideological brick wall, because logic is a recent development. Historically, logic arose from religiously based philosophy. That is why dialectical materialism dates back to Hegel. Marx and Engels were students of Hegelian philosophy, religious philosophy, and they turned Hegel's religious logic into its materialist opposite. Logic is not natural. Logic is the product of thousands of years of human mental training, transformed into basic mental rules for finding the best and simplest answer to an inquiry. Dialectical materialism seems easy, at least I thought so, but reality has given me a different answer. It took many millennia of human development to get to the point where Marx and Engels could create dialectical materialism. When you read Marx and Engels, you are reading works not even possible a few decades earlier. Human brains trying to understand our natural world had to go through millennia of idealist belief in imaginary gods, then advance through a period of narrowing those gods down to a single god before science and a materialist interpretation of reality even became remotely possible. Our brains were not ready for the simplest answer until very recent in human history. Religious idealism is not to be sneered at. Science itself arose from religious idealism. Idealism is the way in the past humans explained how the world works. A materialist worldview today is still the minority, not the majority view, unfortunately, making a materialist analysis often unwelcome in a human population that remains idealist in its thinking. Every day in the corporate media, I see where some experiment has proven the existence of black holes or other magical creations from the relativity hypothesis. These proofs, published in the corporate media and in scientific publications and in Hollywood movies, makes it very difficult for those who wish to question whether those proofs are valid. The tribe has approved the hypothesis and published proof after proof. And who are we to question it? But question it we must. Scientific advancement cannot come from acceptance of today's paradigm. That is a static and reactionary view of what science is. Science is, by definition, exploration of the unknown, not the known. While we all stand on the shoulders of the advances of the past, we do no honor to those in the past by protecting the past. In addition, there is one more ideological wall against modern materialist thinking. Materialism, ever since the 1917 revolution, has come to be viewed as a cover for communist ideology. The bourgeoisie was born in the materialist fight against religious obscurantism. But as soon as the bourgeoisie attained power, it came face to face with the class it created, the working class. And the bourgeoisie quickly ditched materialist ideology and transformed itself into the protector of the very obscurantism that it had fought so hard against. After the 1917 Russian Revolution, the capitalist rulers have waged an ideological war against materialism by falsely posing capitalism as the protector of religion against godless communism. Dialectical materialism is willing to say the truth that the king is wearing no clothes. Truth, therefore, is the enemy in the eyes of the capitalist rulers. An educated population is a danger to the capitalist ruling class. Our corporate newspapers and all the other parts of the corporate media are filled with nonsense that is not by accident. The truth is dangerous to a ruling class that lives off the exploitation of the mass of the population. The very religious obscurantism that the early bourgeoisie fought against has become today its weapon against the working classes worldwide. Marxists understand that most humans still believe in some version of God that created our world. That has not prevented communists from leading the masses in successful revolutions. The Russian Revolution was made in a country that was overwhelmingly religious and illiterate. Yet those religious and illiterate workers and peasants fought heroically under the banner of atheistic communism. This shows that a revolution in the minds of the masses comes after a successful revolution, not prior to that revolution. After the coup that overthrew the Soviet Union, with the return of the capitalist ruling classes, religious obscurantism has also returned, proving in reversing of which class is now ruling, that the beliefs of the masses are the beliefs of the ruling classes. As an atheist myself, it pains me to see some atheists arrogantly insult people's belief in God, without realizing that without religion, they could never have developed science, simply because it was within religion that modern science was born. We accept the masses as they are, not as we wish them to be, but we try to win the masses by telling them the truth that the capitalist rulers seek to hide. That is the dialectic of a revolution. The masses are deliberately kept ignorant by the rulers. The ruling class that is preventing the masses from acquiring knowledge seek to keep communist propaganda away from the masses. The masses are kept ignorant while the communist fights that ignorance in the masses, not by arrogantly insulting the masses, but by understanding where the masses are coming from. Communists both accept and do not accept the ignorance of the masses at the same time. That is the dialectic. We fight for the truth even when the masses believe otherwise. Now let us look at what makes dialectical materialism so valuable for understanding materialist reality. Dialectical materialism made an advance over classical materialism by understanding that change is constant and everything is in constant transformation. Nothing is static. A equals A and A does not equal A at the same time. You are you and you are not you at the same time, simply because you are changing right before our eyes. You are not static. Matter is in constant transition through time and space. The past, by definition, is behind us, and the future is where we are headed. But now can never be pointed to. There is no now in a world of constant motion. Even as the apple is equal to itself, it is transforming into something else. The apple, therefore, is also not equal to itself. Marx and Engels lived in a period of the rapid transformation from the long centuries of feudalism into a world that was rapidly transforming under capitalist rule. They could see both the forward and backward motion of human society right before their eyes. Being materialists, they understood that this rapid change must follow physical laws. The basic law of physics is causality. Every change in the direction of the motion of matter must have a cause to change the direction of that matter in motion. Matter in motion cannot change direction unless impacted by other matter in motion. No matter how far back you go, trying to find the original source of the change of the direction of that matter in motion, you will not and cannot find a beginning point. To find a beginning point without a cause is to believe in magic or a God that created the beginning of that matter in motion. In other words, matter and the motion of matter must be infinite. You can never find a beginning. Another basic law of physics is that matter and the motion of matter can never be created nor destroyed. If you can't create matter or destroy matter and its motion, it means that the existence of matter and its motion is infinite in time and space. If you cannot create matter and its motion, then there cannot have been a beginning. And if matter and its motion cannot be destroyed, there cannot be an end. No beginning or no end is the definition of infinity. What is change? Change results from the motion of matter being impacted by other motion in matter changing its direction. Because matter and its motion cannot be destroyed, then change must be constant. If the motion of matter were not constant, there would be an end to the motion of matter, which would violate the laws of matter and motion. If there could be a beginning or an end to the universe, it would not only be a violation of causality and the basic laws of physics, it would be a claim that change is not constant. Where's the proof that the universe has a beginning or an end? There isn't any. Infinity means that there is no beginning nor an end to matter and motion. It is a universe where nothing is static, where everything is in constant motion and in constant change. Dialectical materialism views everything as a contradiction. Contradiction is based upon the unity of opposites and the changing of quantity into quality and the negation of the negation. Here for this video I will mostly concentrate on the unity of opposites. The infinite and the finite are united opposites. Finite equals something. Infinite equals nothing. This is the unity, therefore, of something and nothing. You cannot have nothing without something and something without nothing. The infinite and the finite are linked in the same way as yes is linked up with no, and up is linked down with down, and life is linked with death, as unified contradictions where one cannot exist without the other. I repeat, the infinite and the finite are the unity of something and nothing. As with all contradictions, one cannot exist without the other. Let me repeat. Something finite is any object, be it a person or an apple. All things finite can be counted. Something finite is an actual thing. However, for the finite to exist and to constantly be in motion, it must have space, otherwise known as the universe, which is nothing to move in. Matter in motion without space is impossible, because the motion of matter requires a void, which is the area to move in. Matter and space are the unity of opposites. How can the motion of matter occur without space to move in? Space is just where matter moves. That is why the unity of something and nothing are linked contradictions where one cannot exist without the other. In other words, in the opposite corollary, that space, the void, cannot exist without moving within it also exists. You can't have space without matter moving within it. Space, by definition, is a void. It is nothing. How can nothing have a beginning or an end? It can't. However, in science, we have also learned that nature abhors a void. Then why is space a void if nature abhors a void? This was where dialectical materialism, unity of opposites, combined with quantity becoming quality, comes to the answer. Why does the universe require such a huge void between individual pieces of condensed matter? If you place a first tiny dot the size of a piece of dust on the ground in New York City, representing that dust representing the size of planet Earth, and a second dot also the size of a piece of dust on the ground somewhere else, representing the size of a planet circling our nearest star to our sun, some 4+ light years away, how far away would that second piece of dust be found? Probably somewhere in Japan or China. That is how far away we are from even the nearest possible planet. Space is a huge void, yet nature abhors a void. However, space is a void and space is not a void at the same time. And the unity of opposites at the same time. And the explanation as to how both can be simultaneously true is found in only one word: infinity. Infinity is not merely a forwards and backwards direction. That would be bad logic. Infinity is in all directions. There is no limit in any direction. Infinity extends forwards, backwards, left, right, and up and down in physical scale, in size, up and down in size as well. For infinity to be fully understood, one must understand that every direction in the universe, including up and down in size and scale, must be infinite. Infinite. All matter is infinitely divisible. An imaginary point particle, as the relativists like to use in their magical theories, that has no diameter, is utter mathematical nonsense. If something exists, it is physical and it must have a diameter. Please show me any piece of matter that does not have a diameter, no matter how small it is. If a piece of matter has a diameter, it must be able to be split, to be cut, which means that all matter must be composed of smaller matter, to infinity. And we at our scale are the smaller part of an infinite number of higher scales of size, and we are at the same time the larger part of an infinite number of smaller scales of size. It means that nothing is solid. This means that infinitely divisible matter, where matter is moving in all directions at every level of every scale, means that matter must fill every single dot of space, and that there is a void at our scale, but no actual void when we understand that there is an infinite number of scales up and down. That contradiction of the existence of a void and the non-existence of a void are required unity of opposites for our very existence as material bodies. In other words, with existing matter in motion being infinite, not just at our scale, but at an infinite number of scales up and down, then every speck of space at all scales must have matter moving through it. There can be no void, and at the same time, there can be no loss of motion of the matter that is in constant motion, which requires a huge void at each scale in order not to interfere in the motion of matter through each tiny speck of that void. That huge distance between our planet and the nearest planet is explained by this contradiction in the motion of matter being infinite in all directions, including up and down. That huge void is why we can exist, yet it is why we will never be able to reach the nearest planet. The distance is just too great. The human species' existence lives and dies within this solar system. This is where George Louis Lesage's solution to Newton's inverse square law involving gravity in 1742 helps us understand both gravity and infinity. However, we must first deal with Newton's mistake as well as his triumph in producing the inverse square law. At first, Newton was adamant in stating that gravity must have a material basis and that action at a distance is just magical thinking. However, in the end, Newton succumbed to that magical thinking and accepted the magical belief in the universal theory of gravity. Gravity, by definition, must be local, not universal, simply because all change of motion must have a direct local material cause. The universal law of gravity is nonsense. Physical collision of matter in motion is required for any change in motion, and gravity causes a change in motion with matter because you're changing direction by falling directly towards a massive object such as our planet, as per Newton's inverse square law. You have all seen graphics from the relativists with gravity being depicted in space, being drawn as some sort of net with curves, with objects such as a planet rolling up and down those curves in the nonsense called space-time. There is no net in space with objects moving up and down. That net, up and down, can only happen under gravity as here on Earth. There is no up and no down in space. Up and down motion requires a massive body, such as the Earth, to create the motion that we call gravity. Again, up and down is not possible in space. Space is nothing. Space is a void. That is all it is. The mass of the Earth is the cause of the force of gravity that pushes us back down when we try to jump up. Newton abandoned his attempt to find out what matter was it that in motion that pushes you back down when you jump up. When you are pushed back down, you have changed the direction of your motion. The basic laws of physics that every change of motion must have a material cause was abandoned by Newton when he accepted the universal law of gravity, which is action at a distance without a material cause for that change of motion. All change of motion must have a local material cause. That material cause was found 3 centuries ago in 1742. George Louis Lesage, in 1742, solved Newton's inverse square law for gravity, which revealed to him that the Earth was almost completely empty space, with almost all his minute particles that Lesage called gravitons being able to move, that are moving at many times the speed of light, would be able to pass through the entire Earth without hitting a single atom. The Spanish Inquisition did not end until 1811, so one can imagine why Lesage's solution to the inverse square law might not have had a welcoming audience. It was 1742 after all. It is only in the past half century that physics has come to the same conclusion as Lesage found in 1742, that all matter is almost completely empty space when you look down in scale. Even our tiny atoms are almost totally empty, with only a tiny speck of matter concentrated at its nucleus, and even that nucleus must also be almost totally empty space. This empty space makes complete sense in an infinite universe where all matter is infinitely divisible, and where at every lower scale of size, matter in motion is far smaller and far faster. You are finite. You exist at this scale because of infinity. You are 99.999% empty space, and at that same time, you exist as solid matter. That is, once again, the unity of opposites. And you could not exist without that contradiction. Our very existence is dialectical. We exist because of that contradiction. You are something and you are nothing at the same time. You exist because the infinity of scale is governed by the same laws of physics at every scale. The laws of physics must operate the same everywhere in the universe, including up and down in scale. We, the human, you and me, are the unity of opposites, the unity of something and nothing. Infinity, therefore, is the basis of dialectical materialism, simply because if the universe was finite with a beginning and an end, then all motion of matter would stop at that end. Change would not be constant. If the universe was finite, it would have a beginning that violates causality, because a God would be required to get it magically started. Now we come to the most misunderstood mental concepts of the relativists, which are the concepts of time, speed, and gravity. Yes, I said that everything they tell you about the concepts of time, speed, and gravity is false. Let's start with the relativist concept of time, which is based on circular reasoning. Albert Einstein, and this was stated in the exact words by noted relativist Carl Sagan, that, quote, "For us convinced physicists, the distinction between past, present, and future is an illusion, although a persistent one," unquote. Oh, really? Is that not the silliest statement you have ever heard? So there is no distinction between the past, where you were a baby, and the future when you are long dead? In the real world, that distinction is very real. You were born, you grow old, and you die. That is a fact of our reality. That is not an illusion, and anyone who tries to claim otherwise is either a nutcase or an educated idiot. Time is a mental concept that was created to measure something else. Time cannot measure time. Even an atomic clock cannot measure time. That is the circular reasoning of the relativist. Time cannot measure time. A clock is a ruler, just like the wooden ruler that measures the length of your foot. The inches marked out on that ruler to measure the length of your foot are just mental concepts, very useful ones for taking that measurement. The fact that your foot is 12 inches long is how we record that size. The foot is what actually exists, not the 12 inches. In other words, all our measurements, are the ways we measure something else, not itself. The ruler is not measuring the ruler. Our clocks are just circular rulers with little demarcations called hours, minutes, and seconds shown on the clock. There is no time inside the clock. A clock is just a circular ruler for taking measurements. So what is the clock measuring? As the seconds pass by, what is happening? What is it measuring? For our clocks here on Earth, those clocks are measuring our 24-hour day. The 24-hour day measures the rotation of the Earth, the daily rotation of the Earth in relation to the sun. If there was no sun, there would be no day, and there would be no clock. There would be no time, because time is just a mental concept of how we measure the motion of matter in relation to the motion of other matter. In this particular case, the rotation of the Earth in relation to the sun. A clock is just a measuring device designed to measure something else outside itself. A clock cannot measure a concept called time. That is just circular reasoning with time measuring time. All that exists in the entire of the universe is matter moving in relation to other matter that is also moving. Nothing else exists, just matter moving in space and time. Our year is just how long it takes the Earth to revolve around the sun. The year does not exist. The motion of the Earth around the sun exists, and it is what it occurs, and we measure the change in that motion and call it time. We do get older. We use numbers to describe our aging process, but the aging process is what is real, not the number I gave in order to receive my Social Security payments. Math is not a substitute for physical reality, despite what the relativists say. Contrary to the relativist idealist nonsense, the past is gone forever. You can have a picture on your desk of your deceased relatives, but that picture cannot bring those relatives back to life, nor can you go back in time to talk to those deceased relatives. Matter in motion, measured by our concept of time, is constantly moving forward and cannot be reversed. The past is the past. Causality cannot be played with like a toy. Once an action is taken, like shooting someone with a gun, you cannot say oops and reverse that action. The past is the past, and we all know that. There is no such thing as time. All that exists is matter in motion in relation to other matter in motion, and we measure that motion with a constant that we call time. It is a type of measurement, nothing more. This should be the ABCs of any scientific inquiry. Yet our magicians of relativity have no clue about those ABCs. Now let's deal with the fourth dimension nonsense. What is a dimension? Are there dimensions sitting next to you? Of course not. A dimension is a concept, not reality. A dimension is how we have learned to measure things. In other words, there is no first, there is no second, there is no third, and there is no fourth dimension. A dimension is just how our mental measuring concept for measuring matter in motion. With actual matter, we can measure its length, its width, and we can measure its height. That's where the concept of a universe of 3 dimensions arises from. That is where the 3 dimensions come from mentally. But what about the claimed 4th dimension? What is being measured in a universe where all that exists is matter in motion? Matter can move in any direction, including forwards and backwards. If the motion of matter can be forward and backwards, then according to this ridiculous hypothesis, then time can move forwards and backwards. In other words, the relatives are trying to equate measuring the motion of actual matter as the 4th dimension, separating the motion from the matter, which is impossible. However, using the 3 dimensions, we measure something that actually exists, that can be transformed in numerous ways. We can take a piece of wood and measure it and make a table, or burn it to heat a house. What can we do with the motion of matter separated from the motion of matter, from the matter itself? Can we treat that motion as reversible or transformable so as to go backwards in motion? In other words, backwards in time? Of course not. The motion of matter is intrinsic to matter. That motion is not separate from itself. Trying to separate the motion of matter from the matter, giving matter another dimension, is a violation not just of physics, but of logic. If your automobile moves 60 miles in 1 hour, what change to the automobile has happened, other than a change in location? Is there a 4th dimension that you failed to see when you drove your automobile? Did the automobile manufacturer forget to install a gauge on your automobile console to measure the 4th dimension of your car's motion? Time is not a physical dimension, but length, width, and height are. Time is just how we measure the motion of that piece of matter. versus another piece of matter in motion, such as the Earth's rotation in relation to the sun. Now let's take a look at speed. The magicians of relativity claim that light waves move through nothing at a constant speed. Oh, and that constant speed, we see it, no matter how we move, it's constant everywhere. We can move forward, we can move back, but the speed is absolute. The light wave speed is absolute. But what is speed? When you are driving a car, your speed is measured relative to the Earth. But at the same time, the Earth is moving much faster as it circles the sun, and the sun is moving even faster as it moves around the galaxy, and the galaxy moves even faster in relation to other galaxies, and on and on and on, till your car's speed is now infinite. In other words, speed is how we measure the motion of matter in relation to a fixed location, such as the automobile in relation to the Earth. Speed is a measurement relative to something at rest, even though nothing is actually at rest. The automobile seems to be at rest versus the Earth, but the Earth is moving and everything else is moving, and you're moving relative to something out there, even at infinite speed. Therefore, speed is not measured against nothing. It has to be measured against something. And therefore, light waves have to be measured against something. Your automobile does not have an intrinsic speed. It just sits on the Earth until we drive it. Nothing has an intrinsic speed. Speed is a relative number, and that includes the speed of light. All waves, including light, require a medium. A wave in water requires water. This is true for all waves in whatever condensed matter they propagate in. This is the ABCs of physics and of logic. The only way to measure the speed of light is against the medium in which it is propagated, simply because it is the wave is a property of that medium. It is the medium that we call the ether that we measure the speed of the light wave it is generated in. Only matter in motion exists, not speed. Speed is just a measurement of that matter in motion, relative only to that medium. Again, the automobile, as in the previous example, moving on our planet, is moving at an infinite speed relative to other scales of matter in motion. So speed is relative, not absolute. Light waves have a constant speed only in relation to the ether, because like water, every medium has a constant speed for its waves. It is not constant in relation to you or me or anything else. Light waves, as with any wave, weaken according to the inverse square law with distance, as with the waves in water weakening over a distance. If light was going through empty space with no medium to carry it at a constant speed, all our sky should be lit up as if we were at high noon, even at midnight, because the light from the infinite number of stars and galaxies would not dissipate. No amount of claiming that dust in space is the reason why our sky does not light up at night can refute this. Light was proven to be a wave and not a particle when light was split into a rainbow by a prism, and when the double slit experiment also confirmed it. Newton's corpuscular theory of light had been long proven wrong, but then along came Einstein to revive the long buried and disproven corpuscular theory of Newton. Einstein went further and proved and proposed, that is, that every observer, regardless of the motion of the observer, would see light moving at the same speed. And again, we come to the same problem. Speed can only be measured against other matter in motion. Speed is relative. Speed cannot be constant simply because speed is a measurement, not something existing on its own, just like the issue of time. We measure speed of matter in motion against other matter in motion, just as we measure the speed of a car. Speed is a mental concept for measuring relative motion. It takes 8+ minutes for light from our sun to reach the Earth. That shows that light waves have a direction of flow, which contradicts the claim that all observers would see light moving at the same speed regardless of the motion of the observer. Isn't it obvious that if we shot a rocket towards the sun, that we would have to add the speed of the rocket to the speed of light coming directly at the rocket to determine how fast the light is moving past the rocket? Just in the same way, you would add up the speed of two cars coming from opposite directions and crashing head-on. Now let's look at the problem of gravity. When we use our eyes to look at the sun, do we see the actual sun, or do we see the sun's image on our retina? The image of the sun on our retina and the sun's rays on our skin is what we actually see and feel. But we are seeing the sun where it was, not where it is, simply because it took over 8 minutes for the light from the sun to reach our retinas. In that 8 minutes, over 8 minutes, the sun has actually moved a considerable distance, and the Earth itself has rotated over 8 minutes away from where the sun actually was seen in relation to the Earth at the same time. In other words, you are seeing the sun where it was, not where it now is. If the speed of light is the limit for all matter, then how is it possible for the Earth to respond gravitationally to the actual position of the sun well before the light rays reach your retina? The Earth instantaneously, the Earth responds instantaneously to the gravitational pull of the sun from where it actually is, not from where you see it. Because as George Louis Lesage demonstrated with his solution to the inverse square law, that his gravitons must be moving somewhere close to the speed of light times the speed of light. Was Lesage's solution to the Newton's inverse square law perfect? How could it be? It was 1742 after all. However, his solution works. That is all that we can ask from a model. His solution is the only material solution to the inverse square law that actually exists. It is the best that we have for now. When you jump up something, in this case, Lesage's gravitons are pushing you back down. The mass of the Earth, which you are standing on, is shading you from a small portion of the gravitons coming from and through the mass of the Earth, but there is no such mass impeding the gravitons coming from you from above your head. That imbalance is what we call gravity. Shading is why mass attracts. Our tides are caused by that shading. As the moon moves, its mass shades the gravitons coming towards the Earth, creating a minuscule weakening of gravity on the surface of the Earth, just enough to create those tides. Just stand by the ocean and you can see with your own eyes how gravity works as the tides move in and the tides move out. let me sum up. When I look at the human body, I clearly see our aquatic origin. When I look at the vast ring of cracks at the bottom of our oceans, with volcanic magma spreading a new ocean floor and black smokers emitting gas and fluid, I see the earth expanding right before my eyes. When I look at the massive size of the Pacific Ocean and its huge depth, I see the result of that expansion. As water first filled the initial crack opening when the Pacific was being born, and as the water filled the crack, the weight of the water pressed down and pushed down the ocean to depths of many miles over time, just as Greenland, with its ice cover, and ice is lighter than water. That is why ice floats. The Greenland ice, lighter than water, if it melted, would cause Greenland's elevation to rise considerably. So too has the depth of the Pacific been caused by the weight of the water above the thinnest crust on Earth. That is where the newest crust is just being born. That's why it's thin there. And it's being born continuously as the Earth expands. When I look at the bones of the dinosaurs, I can plainly see the effect of the lower gravity on Earth, creating those huge creatures at that time in Earth's history, due to the smaller size of our planet, the lesser gravity. I can see all this, yet few of our fellow humans today can. They watch the movies, we're going to make the dinosaurs reappear. No, you can't. Under today's gravity, they would be a puddle. Okay, so hopefully this video helps us to explain that contradiction. The human brain, composed of single-cell animals that cannot read or write or add, only sees what they are trained to see. The failure of our species to recognize that we are not exceptional and we are not above other species, but that we are just one of many species of animal, and that we need to be studied just as we would study any other species of animal. We are pack animals, but not like sheep, which are prey animals. And we are not like lions and wolves, which are predatory pack animals, but somewhere in between both prey and predatory pack animals, with aspects of both. Because our species, which was a predatory species at the beginning, split into opposing classes over history, with a new ruling class, a predatory ruling class, that treats the masses like sheep to be shorn. In other words, our species began as a predator, hunter-gatherer species, like the lions and wolves, but our own technological development as a species has allowed a small section of our species to become masters and exploiters over the rest of our species, and to use them as sheep to be shorn. Our pack animal biology is why the ideology of the masses is the ideology of the ruling classes. We are pack animals. We see what we are trained to see by our rulers. That is why it is so hard to win the masses to socialism, even though socialism is in the interest of the masses, and seems so simple in our eyes to explain to them, to have them understand it. So if the masses want a better life with health care, education, and leisure, and a decent, good-paying job, and an end to the predatory and bloody wars of capitalism, all those things that socialism promises is obvious to our eyes, my eyes, but not to the masses' eyes, simply because, as I just said, the ideology of the masses is the ideology of the ruling classes, simply because we are a species of pack animals, and our brains only see what they are trained to see. That is our reality. And Marxists need to understand that reality and work with the masses to win over those individuals that can become pack leaders in the fight for the better future for humanity, which is socialism. We cannot and must not be discouraged at the stubborn refusal of the masses to see what is so obvious to you and me, that socialism is the answer. The masses cannot see it because of all that I've already explained. The masses will only see what we see when the masses take history into their own hands and make a revolution, and they become the ruling class. And then, and only then, the obvious can become obvious to them. The truth is ideological, not logical, simply because we are humans and we are not computers. History has shown, as happened in 1917, that the most oppressed humans can come together to make a revolution, not only in their physical conditions, but to make a revolution in their very method of thinking about our world, which is what we call ideology. A socialist revolution will create a revolution in human thinking as our minds become less burdened by the propaganda put forth by the capitalist vampires that rule over most of the planet. A socialist revolution will open the eyes of the masses to reality, rather than to the many lies and fictions today that fill the minds of the masses. Only after the revolution will it be possible to vanquish idealism and replace it with a materialist world outlook. Comrades, we have a world to win, and we can see that new world right before our eyes. We will win the masses and make that revolution simply because there is no alternative. It is the choice between socialism and barbarism, after all, isn't it? There is no other choice. Communism must win. Communism will win, comrades.